to guide the conversation with highly persuasive gestures. Camilla sought to project a profound concern for the welfare of the monarchy. Tapping her fingers lightly on the table, she implied that placing such a heavy burden on the shoulders of a young girl like Lady Louise was both cruel and risky. On his armchair, before gently placing an elegant blue dossier in front of him. Her movements were fluid and seamless, deftly weaving a wife's tender care with a distinct personal political agenda. Her eyes intensely monitored every subtle twitch on the king's face as she began against the rim in tandem with her racing thoughts. Camilla understood that if she failed to act now, her influence and that of her inner circle within the palace would soon be eclipsed by the king's wave of modernization. She needed to find a way to divert King Charles III's attention toward an alternative option, someone she could fully trust and control. When King Charles III entered the room, looking visibly fatigued, after a long night reviewing parliamentary agendas, Camilla immediately shifted her demeanor. Rising to her feet, she solicitously rearranged the cushion table, suppressing a surge of rage mixed with utter helplessness rising in her chest. All her exertions, media connections, and sharp calculations over the past several months had shattered against the iron will of the monarch. King Charles III's unwavering, unblinking gaze toward the assembly carried the entire briefing room fell into absolute silence, the nodding approval of the advisors serving as a final verdict, sealing the fate of the Queen's ambitions. Camilla sat motionless in her royal velvet chair, her face turning pale beneath her elaborate makeup. Her hands locked tightly together under the personnel blueprint was entirely blank in the positions Camilla had hoped to secure for her own kin. It was not merely an administrative brief, but an ironclad manifesto delivered before the entire court, purging the apparatus and completely erasing any non-Windsor elements from the future of the monarchy. National patronages and major diplomatic privileges over the coming decade would center exclusively on three pivotal figures: the Prince and Princess of Wales, and the younger generation of succession, represented by Lady Louise Windsor, radiated an unshakable majesty. With a sharp shake of his head and a powerful gesture toward the royal crest carved on the wall, he signaled an ironclad and forcefully shoved Laura Lopes's dossier back toward Camilla. That decisive, chilling movement felt like a bucket of ice water poured directly over the Queen's pride. The king stood up, crossing his coded words, his countenance instantly hardened. His silver brows knit tightly together, and without a shred of hesitation, he used a single finger to arms over his chest and looked directly at Camilla with the austere gaze of a sovereign defending the ultimate boundaries of his lineage. His demeanor raised blueprint of the future royal structure, where the name of Lady Louise Windsor was prominently placed at the very center of succession. The king smiled faintly, a rare smile of a man who had fulfilled his mission to protect the fortress. He had succeeded in forging a new generation of leadership, streamlined, robust, and commanding the absolute consensus of the public. While the remnants of the sovereign directed his gaze after the receding silhouette of the royal vehicle, his eyes filled with serenity and ultimate satisfaction. Beside him, on a small table, rested the finalized into a profound loneliness and a belated acceptance, as the pale amber light of dusk fell washing over the ancient stone walls of Buckingham Palace. King Charles III stood alone on the grand balcony, indispensable pillar of the next generation. She was not merely fulfilling duties, she was reshaping the public image of a devoted, humble, yet thoroughly modern royal family. Louise's unstoppable ascent moved in inverse proportion to the fading prominence of Queen Camilla. Sitting alone in her quiet morning room, Camilla looked out the window. Yet the young woman showed no signs of fatigue or strain. On the contrary, her every action, her every signed decree exuded maturity powerfully, that the media and the public spared no praise. Analytical reports from the monarchy's leading strategic advisors converged on a single conclusion. Lady Louise Windsor had completely shed the shadow of her past to become one of the most critical members and industry and thoroughness. Dressed in traditional formal attire, paired with a delicate tiara, she stood alongside the Prince and Princess of Wales at the international diplomatic reception, confidently exchanging elegant courtesies and warm smiles with the foreign heads of state. This transformation unfolded so naturally and assumed she held alongside the king actually possessed red lines that could never be crossed. Her maneuvers to draw her own family closer to the center of power had completely shattered in a single moment. As she walked out of the room with heavy steps, her heart swelled with a mixture of Clarence House, rapidly transformed into a sequence of concrete actions across the palace offices. Over the subsequent weeks, a quiet yet decisive structural reorganization began to unfold under the direct guidance of King Charles III. On the official royal calendars, unannounced but highly strategic adjustments appeared with increasing frequency, signaling a new chapter in the redistribution of influence. Camilla sat at her personal writing desk, her fingers trembling slightly, as they scanned the updated list of royal patronages and public duties just delivered. Bitterness and fear, realizing her standing in the king's eyes was no longer what it once was, and the tide named Lady Louise Windsor was truly sweeping through the palace, completely unstoppable. The king's blunt rejection at offers to push her own family closer to the center of royal power have collided with a hardline stance from the king himself. Sources suggest the sovereign may have completely lost faith in his most beloved wife, paving the way for a radical new era. What secret plans is King Charles III engineering for Lady Louise that would prompt him to flatly ignore the Queen's objections? And how will Camilla react upon discovering that her position is being systematically dismantled by the very person she once deemed the least of her worries? Inside the sun-drenched study at Buckingham Palace, King Charles III sat deep in thought before his ancient oak desk, his aging yet sharp eyes scanning the meticulously prepared strategic dossiers. Following his historic coronation in May 2023, the weight of the crown and the mission to sustain the monarchy in a new era had remained the sovereign's greatest exertion to elevate her own bloodline. She wanted to prove to the world and to her husband that her family possessed the sharp intellect and grit necessary to represent the crown. However, all of Camilla's maneuvers collided with a wall of glacial indifference from King Charles III. The sovereign saw entirely through his wife's every move. Rather, were suppressed by the Buckingham Palace press office the moment they surfaced, replaced instead by official media releases detailing the dense schedules of the Princess of Wales and Lady Louise. The encounter than speaking out to intervene or provoking heated arguments, he opted for a more definitive and sovereign method of counteraction: systematic marginalization. The press articles engineered by Camilla's camp to deliver her message. She proactively stepped down from the dais, leaning in to converse with and listen to the stories of disabled youth and young volunteers. That natural, effortless warmth instantly captivated everyone present. Thunderous applause erupted across the square, accompanied by the relentless flash of cameras capturing the coronation of a new royal star. The event concluded as a resounding success, far exceeding expectations. In the grand reception room, King Charles III stood alongside the Prince of Wales, his eyes shining with immense pride and profound relief as his niece walked in. The king stepped forward, a radiant yet measured smile gracing her lips. Instead of mechanically reading from her prepared script, she held sincere eye contact with the crowd, utilizing fluid gestures and a warm, resonant voice. Historical wheel of the true Windsor lineage. The ruthless generational shift had pushed her and the figures of the old regime far from the orbit of power. She realized where royal vehicles were being readied to transport Louise's party to a major international engagement. The room that had once been the epicenter of strategic plotting was now shrouded in an intimidating solitude. Camilla slowly traced her fingers along the empty armchair opposite her. She recalled the subterranean. She no longer held a single card to turn the tide, nor did she possess enough gravity to alter any decision of the king's. Her initial bitterness had now crystallized Iranian confrontations, her desperate maneuvers to introduce her daughter Laura Lopes to the court, and the chilling absolute gaze of King Charles III as he dismissed her every proposal. All the schemes, the soft power, and the pride she had spent a lifetime constructing were now reduced to fragments before as well as the scrutiny and skepticism harbored within certain factions of the House of Windsor. The young woman chose to answer through action rather than justification. Every morning at Bagshot Park, Louise woke at the crack of dawn to pore over diplomatic dossiers, memorizing in her interactions with household staff and veteran advisors. Rather than issuing commands, she maintained a reverent deference, listening intently to every piece of counsel regarding court protocol or media conduct. Clad in an elegant wool coat of a subtle royal blue, her blonde curls, the names, titles, and backgrounds of hundreds of public delegates she was scheduled to meet. The rigorous, meticulous nature of her handwritten notes made it clear that she viewed royal duties not as a privilege, but as a sacred obligation to be fulfilled with absolute honor. Louise's humility shone brightest, swept neatly into a low chignon. Louise exuded an intellectual grace that perfectly mirrored the demeanor of her late grandmother. Yet this quiet diligence did not stifle the skepticism of Queen Camilla's camp. They continued to subtly circulate rumors that she was far too timid, lacked King Charles III's hardline decision to sideline Camilla's family in order to elevate Lady Louise was a necessary act of ruthlessness or a calculated move that was far too cold for a reigning monarch. Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it. Of obsolete personal agendas slowly sank into the shadows of obscurity. Lady Louise Windsor, through her devotion and resilience, had stepped onto the summit, officially becoming the proud icon of the enduring future. King Charles III wished to establish for the British monarchy. After watching this story, do you believe Camilla's positioning seemed to be pushed back a step, making way for the dynamic, fresh energy of the two royal women and the young Lady Louise? Every flash of Catherine's smile for the cameras, every warm gesture from Sophie when interacting with the public felt like a laceration to Camilla's pride, reminding her of her own fading presence. Amidst the vortex of change, Lady Louise Windsor received everything detailing the histories of the organizations she was about to inherit. Her intense focus and receptive attitude won nods of approval from even the most discerning courtiers. The development that truly plunged Camilla into a panic with astonishing composure. At her private office within Kensington Palace, the young woman listened intently to instructions from the king's senior advisors. Louise's demeanor radiated reverence, coupled with immense confidence. She took careful notes, turning each page of the dossier's counsel to systematically isolate her influence. As night fell, Camilla stood alone on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, looking down at the deserted courtyard. A generation of Lady Louise Windsor ascended to the stage of glory. Amidst the subterranean shifts of power within the palace, Lady Louise Windsor entered her newest trial with a composure rare for someone in her early 20s. Well aware of the immense expectations of King Charles III, the biting night wind did nothing to cool the fire of anxiety and resentment burning within her. Every step, every signed decree by the king converged toward a single objective: to purge and prepare for a new generation of leadership, a place where there was no room for private, non-royal agendas. The once powerful queen now faced a ruthless reality. She was being publicly edged out from the dynasty's center of power, left to watch helplessly as the contributions over the years. Camilla closely watched her husband's every blink, silently hoping her soft approach and calculated logic would bend his resolve. However, King Charles III's reaction defied all her calculations. The moment he discerned the true intent masked beneath his wife's sugar. Instead, she expressed her desire for the king to consider someone more mature, someone who had tasted life, possessed an extensive social network, and most importantly, held the seasoned poise of a middle-aged woman. That person was none other than Laura Lopes, her daughter from her previous marriage. To substantiate her argument, Camilla gently pushed forward a photograph of Laura attending a charity event. The Queen's eyes gleamed with expectation, a confident smile playing upon her lips. She believed that integrating Laura into certain public representative duties would not only alleviate pressure on the younger generation, but also serve as a just recompense for her family's quiet ways. The Queen felt a bitter lump rise in her throat. Every effort to diminish Louise's credibility or obstruct her growth had now rendered itself entirely futile. Louise was no longer a shy girl, hidden in the shadows. She had scored a monumental victory, crossing the threshold of her trial with pride and officially establishing herself as an inseparable part of the British monarchy's future. The resounding success of Lady Louise Windsor at the gala dealt a severe blow, placing his weathered hand on Louise's shoulder. His deeply satisfied nod spoke louder than any grand commendation. Surrounding senior royal advisors continuously bowed in admiration. They understood that, from this day forward, no one could shake Louise's position in the future architecture of the realm. On the opposite side of the room, Camilla stood isolated by the banquet table, her hand gripping her crystal glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. Witnessing the absolute faith King Charles III placed in Louise with his wife, the king publicly reaffirmed the core strategy for the future of the realm. With a decisive gesture toward the new organizational chart, the king outlined an inviolable inner circle of power. He declared that the entirety of the sovereign grant Camilla deliberately staged for her children were smoothly intercepted by the king's courtiers, who politely escorted them away from diplomatic zones in strict accordance with court protocol. The climax of this silent clash of influence unattributed agenda. Before the large screen in the briefing room, King Charles III stood, his regal demeanor commanding absolute focus. Without a single private consult, folded at an expanded royal council meeting attended by senior advisors, core family members, and government representatives. Camilla sat in her place of honor beside the king, but her mind was stretched as taut as a wire when she saw the newly distressed son and daughter from her previous marriage to appear in the main reception foyers, hoping to orchestrate chance encounters with visiting heads of state and foreign ambassadors. Every gesture of Camilla's, from the way she tilted her head in laughter to her subtle guidance of conversations toward her children's talents, exuded an ultimate to Queen Camilla's pride and her long-laid calculations. Refusing to stand by and watch her own power and that of her personal family being edged out to the margins of the palace, Camilla resolved to make one final attempt to salvage the situation. For days afterward, the rooms of Clarence House were steeped activities, while deftly weaving her own family into the narrative as a symbol of solidarity alongside the king. At private palace dinners, Camilla consistently chose her most magnificent gowns, donning glittering diamond suites as a way to reassert her authority and irreplaceable presence. She deliberately arranged for her steeped in a suffocating atmosphere of intense scheming. The Queen continuously reviewed media strategies, attempting to leverage her long-standing relationships with the editors-in-chief of Britain's leading tabloids to run feature pieces praising Laura Lopes's cherished preoccupation. The king understood better than anyone that for the royal family to stand firm against the shifting tides of changing times, he needed to construct a succession framework of individuals prepared to serve dutifully in the shadows without craving personal glory. In recent months, his gaze had lingered with increasing frequency on the name of Lady Louise Windsor, that was robust, streamlined, and profoundly compelling to the public. The core of the king's long-term strategy centered on none other than the Prince and Princess of Wales, William and Catherine. They were the present, the future, and the faces of a modernized monarchy. However, a grand apparatus could not function solely on two central figures. King Charles III required dependable right-hand lieutenant atmosphere, enveloped the workspaces of the younger generation. Lady Louise Windsor now appeared in an entirely different standing. No longer the timid niece stepping behind senior members, the Louise of the present walked at the vanguard of state ceremonies. Upon her slender shoulders, the number of royal patronages and public duties had multiplied the past to make way for new growth to rise. Throughout the palace corridors, one no longer saw the bustling crowds of courtiers moving in and out of Queen Camilla's offices as before. Instead, an energetic, urgent, direct message to her. The sovereign's decree was absolute, and no one, not even the Queen, held the power to alter it. Camilla slowly leaned back into her chair, her heavy gaze resting on the documents before her, bitterly accepting the truth that in this game of power, she had completely lost. Time passed at Buckingham Palace, like a quiet current, possessing the strength to erode light, when her eyes inadvertently fell upon a folder bearing Lady Louise's personal cipher resting right on the corner of her husband's desk. A subtle but undeniable wave of resentment rose within her. Camilla could not comprehend why the king was placing such immense expectations on a girl barely in her king. For decades, Camilla had maintained a keen awareness of her status and influence within the palace. She stood there, her royal engagement ring catching the lineages to his niece, preparing her for the inner circle of the next generation. This quiet shift could not escape the razor-sharp perception of Queen Camilla. Entering the room with a regal yet noticeably hurried stride, she came to a halt beside the armchair opposite the 20s. Someone who had spent the majority of her life immersed in academic books and carriage driving in the Windsor countryside, rather than navigating complex diplomatic banquets. To Camilla, Louise remained a naive youth, lacking real-world experience, far too timid, and lacking the grit needed to withstand the relentless pressure of the British press. Entrusting pivotal representative roles to such a young member was, in her eyes, an unnecessary and reckless gamble on the eye radiated a tacit disapproval. She realized that her husband's decisions were no longer mere administrative adjustments of routine duties, but a highly calculated realignment of the palace hierarchy. King's part. A heavy silence enveloped the room as Camilla stepped closer, her gaze drilling into the detailed notes outlining Louise's royal training itinerary. Every gesture of the Queen, from the searching tilt of her head to her deliberately suppressed as dusk slowly fell through the grand windows of Buckingham Palace. King Charles III looked up slightly, his eyes meeting the tense, brooding expression of his wife. Without a single word spoken between them, the air thickened with unspoken calculations. Ears had now been reassigned. Their new destination was none other than the offices of the Princess of Wales and the Duchess of Edinburgh. While this arrangement was defined by the royal secretary, her eyes lingered for a long time on the crisp black type, several major charitable funds for the arts and literature, long her pride and the fortresses of her influence for many years. She witnessed the increasingly prominent presence of the trio Catherine and Sophie and Lady Louise across the mainstream media. During domestic tours and diplomatic receptions, executed under the guise of lightening the workload for the senior generation, Camilla understood perfectly well that it was a sophisticated stripping of soft power. The Queen's bitterness intensified as names sat right alongside those of the Prince and Princess of Wales, enveloped by high-level